Hello class, welcome. Last lecture we talked about who are the Chinese-Vietnamese. Now we're going to ask the same question again, who are the Vietnamese? Okay, so this is going over chapter 5 in the Minh Dao book, and who are the Chinese, who are the Chinese-Vietnamese, and who are the Vietnamese? Who are they? So let's take a moment, if you could take out a sheet of paper and take out a pencil or pen, or I guess if you have a smartphone or iPad, just take them out. And please write down the answers to these following 3 questions. So I'll read them and you answer the questions. Who are they? And what I mean they, who are the Chinese-Vietnamese and who are the Vietnamese? Where are they located? Where do they live? And also, number 3, if you can answer that question, what is their social, cultural, language background? Okay, so if they're Chinese-Vietnamese, what is their cultural background and what is the language they speak? So let's take like 1 minute to write down those answers. Let's give that 1 minute. All right, great. So guys, let's answer the first one together. Who are the Chinese-Vietnamese? Now we talked about last class how Chinese-Vietnamese were an ethnic minority in China, and they moved throughout hundreds of years. They moved into Vietnam, and they became an ethnic minority in Vietnam. And then they re-immigrated to the United States. Okay, so they became a double minority. And of course, the Vietnamese are native Vietnamese, and themselves, as an anthropologist, I can say we're all mixed, but they also are in Vietnam. All right, so the question is, where are they located? Now, this is a really interesting question, and I just think it's really astounding and kind of fascinating. So on one hand, that the Chinese-Vietnamese and the Vietnamese were actually scattered all over the United States. So after the fall of Saigon happens, they're put into Utah, Alaska, just spread in every different state. But somehow, through some sort of networking and some sort of kind of interconnections, they all ended up back in California, in Little Saigon. So it's very interesting. A lot of them. So now we have the largest, one of many, but one of the largest, arguably, Vietnamese communities outside of Vietnam actually is in Little Saigon. So if you if you're a student that goes to Cal State Fullerton or something, or Cal State LA or Cal Poly, you could drive to Little Saigon and you could observe this ethnoburb or ethnic enclave. So predominantly they're actually located on the West Coast, and particularly in California. So there's actually quite large Vietnamese populations all over California. And when I think to location, think in your mind, where are the Vietnamese located? Well, of course, we have the largest in Westminster, right? But if you go north, if you go up here and into north, actually not here, that's not thinking of the map of Vietnam. If you go into California, Northern California, San Jose has a huge population. So if anyone who's taken this class from San Jose State, you know that actually there's a large Vietnamese population there. So again, pretty interesting that they actually scattered all over America, but they just networked among themselves, and they somehow went and joined back in California, where they created this ethnic enclave called Little Saigon. So that's the second question answered. Now the third question I asked is, what is their social cultural, let me change this so you can see it. What is their social cultural language background? Well, the Vietnamese, what language, guys, do they speak? Think about it. And they speak Vietnamese, yes. So a lot of the Vietnamese, they speak Vietnamese. But what about the Chinese-Vietnamese? Do they speak, what languages do they speak? Well, there's like lots of ethnic minorities in China. We talked about a couple classes back how there's over 200 ethnic minorities, but also over 2,000 dialects, which they're so different, they're kind of like languages. And so, again, the ones that moved into Vietnam, and mostly in Saigon, they primarily spoke actually Cantonese, right? But some actually did actual other languages, such as Chiujiao or Hakka. So, again, or Hainam. So you have like 4 or 5 languages that the Chinese spoke in Vietnam, the different regional dialects. Actually, not Mandarin. So it wasn't Mandarin, which is now the Putonghua, which is the common language in China. So again, you can see how they're linguistic and minorities in China, and definitely so in Vietnam as well. So their language background is quite varied. The ones that Chinese-Vietnamese, often many of the older ones were actually fluent in Vietnamese, right? And sometimes so fluent, just like people are Americanized, they kind of lose their ethnic identity, their languages, they just learn English or something. In Vietnam, it was the case. So a lot of the Chinese who've been there, 2 generations, they really didn't know Chinese very well at that point. They didn't write it, right? So actually they would speak Chinese with an accent, and so they really couldn't pass that to their children to some extent. And that was actually rated according to class, right? So the upper class Chinese in Vietnam, or because they had money, were able to send their kids to Chinese school and also private school where they maintained their language maintenance. But the working class Chinese that lived in Vietnam could not, and so they went to regular public school, which is Vietnamese school, and so they virtually lost pretty much all their language. So a lot of times when you meet these Chinese-Vietnamese, particularly like Cal Poly, we have so many, you can sort of tell their class background by, can you speak Chinese? Well, they can probably indicate some sort of class background or how incorporated they were in Vietnamese society. So pretty interesting. All right, so there are actually big differences between the Vietnamese and the Chinese-Vietnamese. Now, the height of the Vietnamese interest in the U.S. was what? Write it down. Write it down. What was the height? So it's really interesting. The height of the Vietnamese interest, the Chinese-Vietnamese interest, was pretty recent. Not pretty recent, but the first wave, they made it in the 70s, right? And you have the height of the Vietnamese coming in around the 80s. So you have like a kind of a decade difference. Very mixed. Again, there's many different waves, but 10 years does make a difference in how you incorporate yourself into American society. All right, so Dat Pham actually was he's actually a comedian. He won the last comic standing, and he's a part of these waves. You can tell, he was born in San Diego and in the 80s, and so you can see that how his family obviously came in during the waves, probably a second waver of Vietnamese descent. But actually, Phan also can be a Chinese last name, so I don't know if he's Chinese-Vietnamese or Vietnamese, but let's take a look at Dat Pham. He was actually the winner of the last comic standing, and we'll do.
It's a funny puzzler. I'm small, but all the world call me whale. Because I'm big boy in the casino. Everything I do is crazy big. So when DirecTV offer me biggest, most popular TV package at best price ever, I go all in. The whale don't hesitate. You know what I'm talking about, right, Coco?
Now get the best offer of the year. Call 1-800-DIRECTV.
All right, so if you look on his website, datpham.com, he did win the last comic standing, and he's pretty funny. He has lots of little skits, and this next skit that's coming up is called Dat Pham Bringing Home the White Girl.
Anyways, you love this suit. It's really good. You gotta first take off your shoes. Just trust me on the side. Well, happy Mother's Day to me. Hi, Mom. Nice to finally see you. In December. Oh, happy Halloween, too. Hey, next year, why don't you dress up? Like a sun bouquet. This is my girlfriend, Jamie.
Hi, Mrs. Pham.
Ai có đỡ sao mà đem nó đĩ vậy nha hả? Hả? Mà quỷ ra sao? Con điên hả?
Dad, what's she saying?
Saying that you look beautiful.
No, I said she's hot.
Are you sure that's what she's saying?
Yeah, no, she's saying that she loves you.
I don't love her, she's a whore. Why you betraying Vietnam, huh? Welcome to the dating game of death. Đạt Phạm. Đạt Phạm. Remember, when life gives you lemons, eat them. Remember that.
It's delicious.
Đạt Phạm. Look at you. What you doing with your life, huh? Look at you. Look at you. Look at you. What the hell wrong with you, huh? I know you. You were a Hollywood kid drug dealer. I know you. Party on time, huh? I know you smoke. I know you do this.
I play the kazoo.
I know you smoke the happy cabbage. I know you.
Huh, it's not called cabbage, it's called weed.
How you know?
Just chill out.
Chew? Chew? You don't tell me what to chew. I tell you, chew. What is chew? Hey, anybody wanna go to buy you Thai? That's how you do that with your hair. That time, remember when we children, we play leapfrog? Go up, go down, over, under. It's like gravity rule. You blow the bubble. Remember you blow the bubble? So hot bubble blow time. Bubble blow, blow bubble. Bubble blow, blow the bubble. Now remember, he who laughs last, surrounded by dead people.
Hey, Dad, what was worse, surviving the Vietnam War or raising 10 kids?
Hey, at least the war ended. And in Vietnam I had a gun. Here I just have bad credit. And Jerry Springer. That what the hell wrong with you, huh? Look at you. What you doing with your life? What you been like your brother? He's perfect. He's sitting right there in the perfect chair.
And for the rest in livestock, yes.
Your brother's from the clouds. God bring him down. Angels all around him. You better have a perfect job. You work for IBM. You, clown? Oh, I'm so proud of my son. He communist clown man or drug dealer. So proud of you. Now, remember, for every beautiful woman that's out there.
I get it, Dad. Remember that, right?
No. For every beautiful woman that's out there, there's always a man who is tired of her shit.
Hey.
This pho is really good.
You like it?
Well, you know what? I hate the Pottery Barn.
So you can see, obviously, Vietnamese or Chinese-Vietnamese that immigrated post-1980, so pretty interesting. So he won the last comic standing, pretty funny. You could YouTube his various videos. All right, so anyway, Dat Pham is a good example of this immigration wave that came from Vietnam. He was one of thousands who actually came from Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and sometimes he talks about it in his skits, so it's pretty interesting. All right, now please actually write down this in your papers. Write this down. We'll answer together. most Vietnamese and most Chinese Vietnamese live in what state? I'll give you a hint. It's the same state that all the Cal states are in. You're right. It is actually California. So actually, it's very interesting how the inter-ethnic actually networking occurred, because the Chinese and Chinese Vietnamese were not actually all deposited in California. Actually, they're in Illinois, they're in Alaska, they're actually evenly deposited all over the United States. It's through them themselves reorganizing is that they actually reformed again, and they all moved to actually California. So let's think about it. Why would these Chinese Vietnamese and these Vietnamese, why would they move to California? Like, what is it about California? And of course, it's well loved by, and also well hated, actually. California is the #1 hated state in these various surveys where different Americans talk about the state they hate the most. But actually, we're at #1. So why would these Chinese Vietnamese and these Vietnamese, why would they move back to, or move to, actually, initially, I'm sorry, after the second time, to California? Let's think. Well, if you think of Alaska, Alaska's a very cold place, and is that the similar environment to Vietnam? So raise your hand, if raise your hand at home if you've actually been to Vietnam or East Asia. So if you've ever been there, you know it's actually intensely hot, so hot and humid that it's just just burning hot and humid every day. So actually, a similar kind of areas that have a coastal environment, or I would say Atlanta, maybe Miami, Florida, and definitely California in a way. And so you see, like, actually there are a lot of Vietnamese in those areas. So yes, they went to a state that actually had a similar kind of climate from what they're from, and definitely a very hot climate, so a monsoon type of climate. So it's very interesting that they would find those climates in the United States. All right, so you see now in Little Saigon, you have 39%, and I want to break down. I found the, let's see. Where did this go? Nope. Where'd that go? I actually found the, where did it go? Is there another one? Drats. I actually earlier found the statistical of California, the population, but I'll look for it and post another time. All right, so it basically, I looked at the population of California and where, and the ethnic minorities in California. And so if you look at the numbers in California, you have around 39% Anglo-Americans in California, and you now have 39% actually Latinos in California. And so the rest are, of course, African-American and Native American and Asian. So very interesting. So if you've never been here, there's a little city in Anaheim, Westminster area called Little Saigon, and it's the largest actually Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam. It's huge, and it's very intriguing because, again, these Vietnamese self-selected to re-migrate again from where the U.S. originally migrated them to. So something really interesting, I think. Something to unpack. So previous classes, and again, I want you guys at home to kind of unpack this at home, and maybe I'll go on page 74 of our textbook and read that section. So previously we talked about white flight, we talked about redlining, we talked about covenants that led different ethnic groups living in different spaces. So why are the Vietnamese living and the Vietnamese Chinese, why are they living in the Orange County or the OC? Okay, so let's just go back and to define these previous terms that we talked about earlier, if you're actually watching this video and not the other ones. What is white flight? Well, let's look at Los Angeles. So Los Angeles was Anglo, well, before that actually was Native American, but some of them were killed and pushed off the land. So voluntarily in South Los Angeles, it was a white area. And then later Jewish Americans moved there as merchants, right? So then with lots of lawsuits, African Americans moved in. And so you see something where it happens where there's a white flight, right? So white flight, once you go over like 20-30% a minority, a lot of ethnic groups actually leave, and particularly for Euro-Americans, they actually leave as well. So in LA, you see there's white flight, and then now currently what's happening after the after the LA riots, we have black flight. So if you're watching this in San Bernardino area, a lot of the African Americans, they're middle class, upper middle class, who could have left after the LA riots, moved to actually to San Bernardino, Riverside. So pretty interesting. Now another factor in looking at how Vietnamese and Chinese people lived is redlining. So invariably, I'll have a lot of Japanese American students in my class, and I'll always ask them, well, where do you live? And they'll say something, well, or have Mexican American students, and they'll say, well, I live in Monterey Park. And, you know, to live in Monterey Park is actually not actually, I guess, surprising, because with redlining, and what redlining is you can only live as an ethnic group in certain areas, right? So let's say you're a millionaire African American, but you wanted to live in certain parts of LA. You could not, because it was redlined. The whole area was designated for just Europeans or just Afro-Americans or just Latinos. And so a place that wasn't redlined historically in California was a new actually housing district, and that was Monterey Park. So it's pretty interesting. So you see all these Japanese Americans that were interned after the internment, and they really couldn't live in different parts of LA because of redlining. But there was a new kind of tract housing, and that tract housing was actually Monterey Park, and that enabled actually Japanese Americans to buy their first home, or sometimes their second home after the first one was destroyed or vandalized. And same thing for Latino Americans. So very interesting. Now, a covenant is actually something, it's like a deed that comes with your house. And what that means is, let's say, and you can still see it because there's many people who still have covenants in their houses. It's illegal, but people still have it. It says you can only sell this home to another Anglo-European. So pretty interesting. There's covenants. Some people still have that, okay? So basically, because of these three things, white flight, black flight, redlining, and covenants, it kind of led different ethnic groups to live in different spaces, right? And then, so why is it that the Vietnamese were allowed, or Chinese Vietnamese allowed, to live in the OC? Well, I want you to think about it, and let's take 1 minute. I will fade out, and you will take 1 minute to answer the question. Why do the Vietnamese Chinese live in the Orange County? So basically, we talked about how it was very fascinating. We had this inter-ethnic calling people from all over, right? It had a very nice climate that was very similar to Vietnam in a sense, right? Not exactly, because I don't think Orange County is super humid, but you know, closer to Vietnam than Alaska, right? So let's look where they were put. So let's look at the history of the Vietnamese and the Chinese Vietnamese, where they were processed, quote unquote. All right, so there are 4 main places that the book talks about. There's Camp Pendleton, California, okay. There's Fort Indianatown Gap, Pennsylvania. We have Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And then we have Elgin Air Force Base in Florida. So these are places that they were split, but actually they were split other places as well. So if you're interested, it's really interesting how inter-ethnic communication happens. There's kind of a power in that, right? That there's like a spread of information, right? And it's actually not with money, because you think about the ones who came here, they sort of like took all their money, or they lost all their money when they got to the United States. So it wasn't just like they had money where they could buy homes in these nice areas. They literally just interethnically communicate with each other somehow through primarily probably with telephone, right? So the fact that they can get millions to move to one zip code is really intriguing, okay? So they really did end up in 2 places. Let's think about the 2 places. Well, there's Orange County, and we talked about how Little Saigon. is in Orange County, San Jose, right? So if you're watching this from San Jose State, you know better than I that the huge population of Chinese and Chinese-Vietnamese who go to San Jose and Los Angeles. So it's intriguing, right? You have the thousands of Vietnamese coming post-1970s, post-1980s, spread all over, but then they themselves using kind of cultural soft power, right? And what I mean by cultural power is this. So a lot of times people think of power as money, right? Oh, I have a lot of money, I have power. Well, there's something called cultural power, right? And if you're an ethnic group, you kind of know what I mean. You can go into a restaurant and you know certain things, and you can get a certain deal because you are that ethnic group, or you'll get information because you are that cultural group. So a classic example sometimes I'll use is this. One time I went to Mexico City, and I went with my girlfriend. And usually, if you go to through the airport, I think it's like $400, $500 to fly from Los Angeles to Mexico City. Sometimes even more, right? Even more than $500. And so my girlfriend she is a native of East Los Angeles, and she speaks Spanish. Her family obviously speaks fluent Spanish. She's very firmly 1.5 generation. And because of that, there are these airline kind of sales places, right? And because of she's co-ethnic and she has this cultural soft power, she was able to get an airline ticket, using the kind of local rate. And so we both went to Mexico City for $180, right? So that sounds kind of insane, right? The actual posted is like 500 something, but actually with locals, they have their own deal. So that's what I mean by cultural soft power. Something happened here where these thousands of Vietnamese, with probably the use of not money, so it's not monetized. You use some sort of cultural power to kind of convey a message or to get their other family members. Remember, because they don't have a lot of money to actually move. So it's very intriguing how they did this. That in itself is kind of worth a book. Okay, so let's take a look at this.
Little Saigon created by immigrants when the war ended in 1975. So when Saigon fell, the communists took over the country in 1975. That's when I migrated. And so Little Saigon was established by people, first generation, or the refugees actually from Camp Pendleton, and we were kind of dispersed throughout. There was about almost 1.2 billion refugees at the time, throughout the 70s and the 80s, actually. But then because of the climate, so because of Camp Pendleton, we had some refugees, people in there, they actually had sponsored any Catholic church, any organization, religious organization or individual could sponsor a family. And then sort of help us assimilate into mainstream, help us go to school, get jobs, and buy a house, and start our life here. And so people in Southern California then started, grow vegetables, Vietnamese vegetable herbs in their backyard because we missed, food from home. And it started when they started trading. And since Garden Grove real estate was really cheap, it was a pretty depressed area before the Vietnamese refugees came. And since it was cheap for them to settle here, so they started to kind of settle in this area. And then, just like any immigrant group, we start calling our friends. California is really great. The weather, you can grow, the tropical gorilla, you can grow, you can make a lot of good stuff. So then, people like my family, we were sponsored to settle in Indiana, of all places, in the Midwest. So we lived there for 10 years, but then, some friends started to call, families started to call each other and say, California is really good, there's no snow, it's not that cold, it's warm. And so people start to gravitate here, Vietnamese. And then they just start to, to open up shop, little restaurant here and there, and that's how it was established. Little Saigon back then. Now, when we, as refugees, when we moved here, our food came with us. What that means is, back in wartime, we didn't have really formal restaurants. So we had a lot of street food vendors, whether it's sandwich making places, or even like noodles, bowl, or even a full-blown restaurant, but you eat basically out on the street, with a little store, for those of you who have been to Vietnam. it's pretty much street food. And so we don't really have formal restaurants. So what that means is street food is quick bite, something that's easy to assemble, and usually are sold by little grandma or mothers with the 2 baskets, and she would sell it on the sidewalk. So usually those dishes you have are just like the one single dish like pho. That's how really pho started. All of the noodle dishes, because it's all pre-made, and then all they do is just put it, all we do is just put it in the bowl and pour over the broth. Easy. And so when we came over here, we sort of took all that food with us, and we transplanted here. And it sort of got stuck because of, well, politically, because of the strong anti-communism in the community also, that what we had before, we took it here, and then that's how we pretty much eat and you know, kind of live our life around this food.
Great kind of soft power talk about how ethnic minorities actually can use their soft power, their cultural power to convey information, because again, the Vietnamese and the Chinese-Vietnamese, but in particular the Vietnamese, are not a high income population, so actually very working class, and there are members who actually take food stamps and welfare, so that they can convey, you know, where to live and to get these other thousands of Vietnamese to the one area of Little Saigon, which is Westminster here locally, is very interesting, intriguing, I think. All right, let's look at the demographics. Let's define this again: demographics, social, economic, and educational profiles. Okay. Now I'm gonna have you guys mentally think, what is one first generation again? Okay. So a first generation is someone who comes here post 18. Okay. What is a 1.5 generation? Okay. Well, maybe you went to school in Vietnam, or you went to school in Mexico up to age 10, right? So you're like very well known. You go up to 6th grade, you very much know that culture, and then after 6th grade, you move to the United States. Yes, you grow up and you lose your accent, but you still have a lot of memories, right, of quote-unquote the old country, right? So 1.5 generation is someone who's moved here before the age of 18, okay? And it can be very, you were not born here, it can be 2 months after you're born to 17 and a half, okay? So 1.5 is below age 18. Second generation is pretty easy to sparse. It's if you're a descendant of first generation, okay? Now the Chinese-Vietnamese are a what population? Well, right now they're primarily a 1 and 1.5 generation population, right? So that is very interesting, and the Vietnamese population is also a first generation primarily population. So that is actually really intriguing, right? So that's basically saying that they're super young. They're a super young population that recently arrived, right? So they're just going into their second generation, right? So very interesting. So that means, that says a lot, right? So it says a lot that probably many of them still speak their native language, right? And if you come over young, sometimes you come over as families, right? And so you're still very young, and your children also will speak your language. So it's very interesting, okay? So if you look at the medium age, I want you guys to look on page 78 and write down the answer. Look on page 78 and write down the answer. And I actually will post this chapter online. Fair use, you can use less than 10%, so that's fine, okay? So by yourself, if this was a regular classroom, I'd actually have the students read page 78, but that's okay. Read it to yourself, okay? It's a really good quote on the generations of Vietnamese and Chinese-Vietnamese. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Now, the majority of Chinese-Vietnamese Americans are foreign-born, okay? So let's actually write that again, circle that, underline that. That's really important to know. The majority of Chinese-Vietnamese, and I'm also going to make the argument for Vietnamese as well, are foreign-born, okay? So that is huge. What does that say about your identity? What does that say how you identify with? What does that say about your language skills, right? If you're born somewhere else, okay? So again, that is really interesting. But if you look even closer to the Chinese-Vietnamese population, right? Although the majority are foreign-born, actually the majority are 1.5 generation, right? So to many people, it's kind of imperceivable, right? That, oh, well, they don't have an accent, so they must be like second generation or Americanized. But actually, they're not born in the United States, and there's lots of studies where Asian Americans, a lot of them actually are foreign born. So this is a very interesting phenomenon. All right, so we have the Chinese-Vietnamese Americans have a higher naturalization rate than Vietnamese Americans. And we talked about last lecture, why is that, okay? Well, it had a lot to do with the migration. We talked about how Chinese-Vietnamese came like sometimes 10, sometimes 15 years earlier than the Vietnamese Americans. We have actually current Vietnamese Americans actually immigrating now, today. Actually, I have a Vietnamese male student who actually immigrated a year ago from Vietnam, so I think 2 years ago from Vietnam. And it's really intriguing. It's a really different. I think the bulk of the Chinese-Vietnamese have already immigrated over, but now it's kind of a light trickle of more Vietnamese who become Vietnamese Americans. So very interesting. All right, so if time permits, I'm going to show and talk a little bit about not just Chinese identity, but of Chinese-Vietnamese identity. Okay, so what I like about this chapter, and I'm going to probably talk about it again and again and again, is location. Okay, so I'm going to type it out for you guys. Location, location, location. And this is something about ethnic identity. And I want you guys right now to write in your own notes, where were you raised? Where were you born and where were you raised? And do you think the area that you were born and raised, does that have something to do with your ethnic identity? Okay. So something about, I'm going to prep you for next class, is just totally, to me, just mind-blowing, okay? You have primarily, she looks at the Chinese-Vietnamese population, and she says that, it's almost like split. Half of the Chinese-Vietnamese population moved to Little Saigon, and Little Saigon is a Vietnamese dominant area, Vietnamese and Vietnamese Chinese area, okay? The other half, they choose to live in maybe more Chinese ethnoburbs, such as Alhambra, El Monte, Monterey Park, even Chinatown, right? And something that she makes, Monica Trieu, her argument, it's just so, like, to me, mind-blowing, because she says location, 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 and it's one of the titles of her chapters, is that she argues that the location that you're raised has some effect on your identity. Actually, not just some effect, but a crucial effect on your identity, right? So let's take out, fluid identity theory. Let's take out genetic theories of, you're born with identity, etc. She has an argument. This is why I think I hope she makes her theory more widely known. So she actually interviewed over 50 Chinese-Vietnamese and Chinese-Vietnamese and Chinese-Vietnamese that live in Little Saigon, and Chinese-Vietnamese that live in more Chinese ethnoburbs. And she had actually a startling conclusion. And what she came was the Chinese-Vietnamese, remember, this is the same group, they just split in half, right? The Chinese-Vietnamese that moved to Chinese areas such as Chinatown or Chinatown or Monterey Park or Alhambra or Pasadena or Arcadia, who moved to Chinese area had more of a Chinese identity. In fact, they identify as Chinese. And the Chinese-Vietnamese that moved to more Vietnamese area, which is Little Saigon, had a Vietnamese identity, right? So that is totally fascinating. That, to me, is like mind-blowing that the same group of people that just moved, one to more Chinese-dominated, one to more Vietnamese-dominated, had actually disparate kind of identities. So I don't know if anyone finds that fascinating. That to me, that's just mind-blowing, that the location that you're raised in affects your identity. Remember, this is the same Chinese-Vietnamese group. But one group is more, from whatever happenstance, moves to a Chinese area, and they have a Chinese identity, like a firm I am Chinese identity. But the ones who move to Little Saigon have, relatively a firm Vietnamese identity, right? So this kind of like boggles a lot of identity theorists, because again, it has nothing to do with their citizenship. Their citizenship is American, but previous citizenship was Vietnamese, right? So it's this these Chinese Vietnamese, they're minorities of Vietnam, but their citizenship was Vietnam at one point, right? So that didn't really have anything to do with it as much as location. So to me, that's very interesting. So sometimes I'll ask my students, where are you from, right? And you can sort of kind of tell like how their identity would form based on their location. All right, so let's take a break. And and when we come back, I'm going to talk about Big Bad Chinese Mama. And I'm going to talk about Chinese identity in the general. All right, I'll see you soon.